Warning, to talk about this DLC, I will have to spoil the main game of Dead Space 3, so if you haven't played it yet, or you haven't finished it yet, then you might want to skip this portion of the review. Anyway, let's get into the story. The story for this DLC takes place right after the end of the main game, and it follows Isaac Clarke and John Carver once again, which at the end of Dead Space 3, they were presumed dead. But in this game, they wake up, they don't know why they're still alive, because what they did at the end of Dead Space 3, let's just say it was a lot of stuff, so I don't know why they're still alive, and they have no idea why either. Let's just say they are relieved to be alive, and they want to get back home as soon as possible, so they can get some well-deserved R&R. Things don't go as planned as Isaac and Carver start to have visions that they both share, and some of these visions even blur into the real world. Also, they encounter what's left of the cult that worshipped the markers in the main game, and let's just say it's pretty disturbing what they did to themselves, and I won't spoil it here. If you play the DLC, you'll see. You'll definitely see. It's pretty disturbing. So that's pretty much the plot of the DLC, and I actually really enjoyed it, especially since they play around more with the visions and the insanity of the main game, and they gave us more dialogue between Isaac and Carver, which I felt was lacking in the main game. So overall, I thought the story here was actually very interesting, and I actually liked the whole twist that they gave us at the end. So yeah, the story here was great. Now let's talk about the sound, which is pretty much exactly the same as the main game, except for a couple of differences here and there. One, the sound design is a little bit more creepier in this game because it's trying to set up more tension, and there's scenes where the world will change around you and it actually gets kind of creepy. I won't spoil too much, but let's just say it does get pretty creepy in this game. The soundtrack is very limited, just like the main game, just so it can add more tension to the atmosphere with the sound design. And the returning voice actors that played Isaac and Carver do a damn good job in this DLC, especially since they actually converse in this. So overall, I think the sound here is great, just like the main game. Now let's talk about the graphics, which, for the exception of a couple of new environments and a couple of new enemy types, it pretty much looks exactly the same as the main game, which isn't a bad thing because the graphics were fantastic in that, but they didn't really add too much. Hell, some of the environments you go through are exact same environments that you've been through in the original game. Like I said, there's a couple of different environments, but none of them are too spectacular. But there is actually a couple sequences here and there that are actually really cool looking, especially the ending when you're flying through space and avoiding debris and lasers. That was a really cool sequence. But for the most part, the graphics are exactly the same as Dead Space 3's, which should not come as a surprise. But now let's talk about the gameplay for Dead Space 3 Awakened, which is exactly what you would expect. More gun blasting, enemy slaughtering fun, just like in every other Dead Space game. Besides a couple of new enemies to kill and weapon parts, this is pretty much the gameplay of Dead Space 3, which is fine because I always found the gunplay in Dead Space 1, 2, and even 3, especially 3 actually, to be very refined, very fun, especially just stomping and murdering necromorphs and seeing them just split apart in millions of pieces. Well, not millions, but you know, like 5 or 6 pieces. It's really fun. Now don't get me wrong, there are things that happen in the DLC. It's not just like, hey, point A to point B, just kill a bunch of necromorphs. No, there's times where you actually see visions, and sometimes they actually blur into reality and you have to kill the enemies like that. And it's a really cool setup, and it's actually kind of creepy at times because it can happen out of nowhere, and it's really, really startling. And besides the visions, the atmosphere and the tension that this DLC builds is actually pretty damn good. And when you get to the end, there's a boss battle that's actually pretty decent. I would actually say it's better than the boss battle of the main game. Not by much, because it actually kind of follows the same structure in a way, but I actually liked it a little bit better because it was a little bit more creepier than the final boss of the main game. Now the thing is, the DLC is extremely short. It's $10 for a little over an hour of gameplay. You get 3 new chapters, and they are fun. They are a lot of fun. It's really, really well structured missions here with a very compelling story, but it is way too much for an hour of gameplay. That's pretty much it. And there's no big differences. They only give you a couple new weapon parts that don't really do much. They only increase the strength a little bit, and that's really it. Yes, you can play through the co-op again and see little differences here and there, but for the most part, I think it's a little bit too much, but it still is a lot of fun. So when this DLC drops in price, definitely go check this out, because I think this is a really good DLC, very creepy, a lot of fun just to go through, but it's way too much for $10. So there you go, there's my review. It's a pretty quick one. I really enjoyed this DLC, but I think it's a little bit too much. Thank you, and goodbye.